Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session this afternoon, Human Potential, Are We Cracking the Code? My name is Gina Lodge, and I'm the CEO of the Academy of Executive Coaching, and I'm very delighted to welcome our 5 world-class speakers this afternoon. We have a real treat. I'd like to introduce them very briefly. You have wonderful bios in the magazines that you've been given. Thank you. And so we have Claudio Fernández-Aráoz, Executive Fellow HBS and Senior Advisor for Egon Zehnder. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Sally Helgesen. Sally is a women's leadership consultant and author. Isaac Getz, Professor ESCP European Business School. Sunnie Giles, President of Quantum Leadership Group, and Curtis Carlson, the founder and CEO of the Practice of Innovation and the former CEO of SRI. So, just to introduce our subject, in Richard Straub's recent article in Harvard Business Review, he refers to human potential as being the most underutilized resource on the planet. How do we transform this vast and available resource into success for organizations? The challenge to leaders and managers is how to unlock the potential in a way that meets the needs of the 21st century. How do we bring greater purpose, meaning, and value to the workforce? Where does potential come from? And how do we crack the code which will enable us to identify those leaders equipped to face the changing needs of the economy and society? With a global talent pool to choose from, how do we draw on the known benefits of an inclusive and diverse workforce? The labour force of the future is likely to range from young professionals through to an ageing population who may be working into their 70s. Leaders and managers will need skills to develop the potential of this new landscape. And what does an entrepreneur look like in this future world? And how do we create an innovative global economy in which technology and society interact? Is there a better model of leadership which could liberate organizations and facilitate a leader's personal transformation? Perhaps, as Peter Drucker said, it is not about how can I achieve, more how can I contribute? So what does it mean to crack the code, and how can we develop a common language around these topics? We're going to start with a brief speech by each of the presenters, and I'd like to welcome Claudio to start.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Gina. Good afternoon. I'd like to share with you, first of all, why potential is so important. Potential is so important because the world is changing, and the world of work in particular is changing. Sorry, this doesn't seem to work. Can someone fix the clicker? Or give me a new one? Sorry about that. I hope you can see in that picture. That's a picture of Gina when we identified her as a high potential in her early years. And the idea is not only to spot potential at an early age, but also to help these high potentials rise to ever higher levels of lasting greatness. I'll start speaking, and as soon as the clicker comes in, I really need to use some slides. I'll catch up from where we are. First, why potential is so dramatically important. Clicker is coming. Thanks very much. Yep. You know, I come from Argentina, a place where I always say that even the past is unpredictable. Well, we seem to have exported this unpredictability even to Vienna. All right. We are watching the dawn of a new era for making great people decisions. The first era lasted millennia, and the focus of our people decisions was physical strength because work was physical. With the Industrial Revolution, work became more complex. We needed to focus on IQ, and work became standardized, and that's why we focused on past experience and past performance. Over the last several decades, work became very complex and jobs very unique. And that's when the competency movement was born. The essence is that you would decompose a job into the required competencies or abilities required for a job. How much strategic orientation does a job require? Huge for Jeff Bezos leading Amazon.com, much lower for other jobs. But now the problem is that jobs are not only complex, they are changing all the time in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. So even if a person has the perfect competency match for a job, the problem is that the job itself will change very rapidly, and unless the person has the potential to continue growing and learning, they won't be able to continue performing at a very high level. So how can we assess potential given that it's so crucial? 4 hallmarks. First, curiosity. Second, insight. High potentials are outstanding at separating the wheat from the chaff in this complex world, at listening to the tiny, subtle signals while ignoring all the noises, at connecting the dots. As a result of their curiosity and insight, they come up with their creative vision. The third element kicks in, which is their engagement. High potentials are outstanding at engaging others' minds and hearts towards that creative vision. And finally, high potentials have great determination. They are extraordinary at keeping a very hard, demanding objective under very difficult circumstances. They don't crack under pressure. Now, this is how we can identify high potentials. The second question is, how far can they go? Because not all high potentials were created equal. And as Peter Drucker said, the job of a leader is to understand each one's unique strengths and, referring in the Bible to the parable of the talents, multiply those strengths. Well, in our research of over 30 years, we found that each of these hallmarks of potential correlates in a different way to each of the frequent leadership competencies. Curiosity is essential for any leadership competence, but for example, and quite obviously, strategic orientation is the result of great curiosity and great insight. So if you have a high potential with great curiosity and great insight, involve her in the strategic projects because she can develop a great strategic orientation. On the other hand, if another high potential has a very high level of curiosity and engagement, she can develop great levels of team leadership, collaboration, and influencing skills. Let me apply this knowledge to 3 key people decisions. First, deciding on an appointment. This is a real case of a British lady who was being considered for a job. She had been traditionally a high performer. She was, however, missing about 1/3 of the essential experience required for her job. How many of you would appoint that person for that job? Raise your hand. Okay, 33.5% of the room. Thank you very much. Now, we need to look not at the past, but also at the present. So that's the white dots are the target levels for each of the competencies, how much strategic orientation is required for that job, how much influencing skills, and so on. As you can see there, the blue bars are the assessment of her current level of competence. She is falling behind in 3 out of the 9 competencies required for the job, in addition to not having 1/3 of the required experience. How many of you will appoint her to that job? Okay, 8.5% of the room. Thank you very much. We need to look at their potential. Look at her potential. This is an extraordinary high potential. 4 out of 4 in terms of engagement determination, 3 out of 4 in terms of curiosity and insight. And then, based on the correlations between each of the hallmarks of potential and the frequent leadership competencies, we can forecast how far she can go. And when you do that, and you look at the orange bars, we see that the whole picture changes dramatically. And someone we were not considered to appoint in that job because of her lack of experience and even current competence will very soon perform beautifully in that job and even in the further expected promotion after that. Let me illustrate another example of this. This is the case of a decision between 2 CEO succession candidates. Mr. X was slightly more competent for that job than Mr. Y, and he was running the most important business unit. So the chairman wanted to promote him. But again, if you look at their potential, Mr. Y has a much higher expected performance. Our recommendation in that case was to rotate them, to give Mr. Y exposure to the core business. A year after that, he was promoted CEO. In 3 years, he multiplied the value of the company by a factor of 2.5. Third example of how we can use this to make great people decisions, fostering diversity. This is a case of a Japanese, very large global company where the CEO wanted to foster diversity. We identified 10 high potentials. The one in the picture, I'll call her Noriko. She was missing 2 out of the 3 competencies for the job she was being promoted. However, again, when looking at her potential, we considered she could do beautifully. So our recommendation was to send her to the US, where she would find more role models of female great leaders, to attend an executive program at the university, to be exposed to great female leaders. And she did so well in that job that in less than 2 years, she was further promoted a second time, going back to Tokyo, reporting to the CEO directly as the head of global partnership and strategic alliances. So we know how to unlock potential. However, why this doesn't happen? Why is it that more than 50% of the people, according to Gallup, are disengaged? Why is it that according to a corporate executive board, executives believe that only 13% of their incoming leaders are competent? 3 problems. Ignorance. 70% of the organizations don't have a robust model for assessing potential. 80% of them don't train their leaders on assessment. If you don't know what you're looking for and you don't know how to look for what you don't know that you're looking for, it's very hard to get it. Second, apathy. People don't care. People care about themselves. And this is a result of our not assessing people on values in addition to their competence. In the business schools, we look at the GMAT, basic IQ. When hiring people, when promoting people, we don't look at their values. And finally, perverse incentives. Organizations are fundamentally rewarding short-term performance. The good news is that all of this is very easy to change. Ignorance is the easiest to fight. Making great people decisions is not the result of an intuition, a gut feeling. It is a craft and a discipline that can be learned and should be learned, and organizations should train their leaders on assessment. Apathy. We should do what Jim Collins identified as the #1 factor of level 5 leaders. Choose those leaders who have this paradoxical blend of fierce commitment together with deep personal humility. Those who are motivated to build something larger for themselves long after they are gone. Perverse incentives. If you look in the US, General Motors used to be the greatest factory of CEOs. You adjust by size, McKinsey is the #1. And they did the same thing. Hire high potentials, rotate them through stretch assignments. But if you look globally, in my view, the best factory of CEOs is Hindustan Unilever, the Indian division of Unilever. Why? Because of the right incentives. Up to 50% of the bonuses of the senior leaders depends on the quality of the leaders they have developed for themselves and for others. If we fight ignorance, apathy, and put the right incentives, we will not only build organizations built to last and even to rise to ever higher levels of lasting greatness. Fundamentally, and as Peter Drucker advocated, we will be giving the people in our organizations the chance to become the great leaders they were always meant to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claudio. And now I'd like to welcome Isaac.
Thank you, Gina. How many Americans are in this room? Okay, some are hiding, maybe. How many French? There are some French. So maybe you will like this joke, because there are differences among us. An American diplomat says to a French diplomat, you know what, we have invented this new approach and it's great, it works in practice. Yes, says the French diplomat, but does it work in theory? Why did I tell you this joke? Because as academics, we're always looking for a theory. a model. Over the last 20 years, I have studied over 300 companies as ethnographer, seeking this ideal organizational model that liberates employee initiative and potential. The bad news is that I haven't found a theory. And from someone coming from France, that hurts. But the good news is that I have found a lot of practice that works. A lot of real companies who have really transformed themselves and truly liberated the potential of their people. Let me tell you, to explain what does it mean, two stories from two leaders whom I have studied and who have transformed their companies. The first one, and the main message that I will give you, is that corporate liberation, sorry it went too bad, can only begin when the leader lets go of her ego. So here is my first story. Bob Davids was the CEO of Radica Games, at that time the leading electronic toy manufacturer and the New York Stock Exchange publicly traded company. They were building a plant in China. One day Bob Davids was walking along an open ditch and saw their Chinese workers laying sewing pipes without a slough so the sewage wouldn't flow. Bob Davids removed his shoes, jumped into the mud, demonstrated how to lay the slopes, how to lay the pipes with the slope, and left. After letting Chinese workers to repeat and build 2 more sections. Chinese managers were shocked, but this episode spread throughout the company and made Bob Davids a leader his Chinese workers trusted. My message is not, of course, that chief executives need to get their feet muddy. My message is this: leadership is not a position assigned by your superiors, but a role granted by your people when they choose to follow you. Why is it so important? Let me give you another story from Favi, which is a European leading auto parts supplier. And the story is from 1980s, but I love it. One late evening, Christine is cleaning her chief executive's office when the phone rang. She picked up the phone, and the caller apologized for not warning about the late arrival, but said that Favi was due to pick him up. Christine, nobody being around, took the keys from one of the company's cars, drove to the airport, drove back the visitor, put him in the local hotel, and went back to finish cleaning. She didn't ask for permission. She did what she thought is right. And it's great she did, because the visitor was the quality auditor from Fiat, who was so impressed that he raised the quality rating of Favi by 10%. Wouldn't you like to have employees like Christine in your company? But in most companies, Christine would not answer the call to her boss, have access to company's cars, or dare to leave without a permission. In Favi, the most important person is not the CEO, but the one facing a challenge. Christine surpassed herself, but she was not thanked for that, because in Favi, everyone is expected to take great initiatives. But in most companies, the excessive ego of some prevents the self-surpassing of all. Therefore, the company's chief executive has to start letting go of her ego if she is willing to crack the code to human potential. FAVI is operating in this liberated forum since 1983, and some companies like Gore, the manufacturer of Gore-Tex, or Quad Graphics, the world's second largest printer, are operating in this liberating manner even for longer. So no, liberated companies are not a fad soon to be replaced by something new. They're neither an anarchy, as already in the 19th century, Lord Acton said, liberty is not the power of doing what we like, but the right of being able to do what we ought. So, can any company be liberated? In fact, it's the wrong question. The right question is, can any chief executive can let go of her ego and transform herself, becoming a liberating leader? I have never met a successfully transformed liberated company without its CEO letting go of ego. True, some didn't need to do that because they didn't have an ego to begin with. Yet most needed several months of executive coaching, and then some needed a psychoanalyst. I had to tell this one because, after all, we're in Vienna. Infants in Latin means a child not having the ability to speak. Because many leaders think that they are the most intelligent people in their organizations, they never ask for the employees' ideas, thus treating them as infants. Treat your people as the adults they are, and give them the freedom they crave. And only then, together with them, you will be able to co-create a new version of your company where people go not because they have to, but because they want. And where instead of doing their 9 to 5, they will do their absolute best to realize your company's vision and passion. So here is my message. The true measure of leadership is in its redundancy. Lose your ego and gain engaged, passionate people. Gain a thriving business. Make the world a better place. It's a very simple theory, but it works in practice. Time and time again. And after all, that is the true test of any theory. If I go back now to my diplomats, the French diplomat may be surprised how many liberated companies are in France, to which he may say that it's normal for a country built on a theory of liberté, égalité, fraternité, to which his American counterpart may say if it works there, it can work anywhere, and it does. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isaac. So we're off to a great start, hearing about how to identify potential, empower people, and let go of our egos. So now, Sally, welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
I heard you were wrong, sorry. There we go.
I'm not using. Oh, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be with this group and have the privilege of addressing you in Peter Drucker's city. We're talking about cracking the code on human potential. I do see two glimmers that give me faith that we may be approaching that. And the one is the emphasis on the importance of engagement, which has become a buzzword, but I think a buzzword for a reason, that we cannot crack the code until we have an engaged workforce, which requires practices of engagement at the top. My own specialty is women's leadership and inclusive leadership. I've been working in this field for the last 30 years. So I'm going to address this idea of engagement and cracking the code from that perspective. I think it's noteworthy, and it rarely goes acknowledged, that we have watched our definition of what superb and effective leadership is change over recent decades, and that women's participation as leaders and in organizations has been key to this transformation, yet it is rarely acknowledged. Let me give an example of that. 30 years ago, when I published the book, The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, which was the first book that looked at what women had to contribute as leaders rather than how they needed to change and adapt, I set forth what, on investigation, I used a diary study method, sort of adapted from my friend Henry Mintzberg, who I believe is here. And I set forth the primary characteristics of women leaders at their best. They were things like ability to build strong relationships, comfort with direct communication, and putting themselves in the center of things. And at the time, I was told over and over, those are not leadership skills, those are soft skills. And what I have watched over the last 30 years, and this has been the privilege and the thrill of my professional life, is I have watched every one of those characteristics become recognized as effective leadership characteristics. Indeed, when Laszlo Bock published his book on who succeeds as a leader at Google, using Google's famous algorithms internally to try to identify what was successful, it was noteworthy that every single one of the characteristics that he set forth was a characteristic that had been identified not just in The Female Advantage, but since, as a characteristic of women's leadership at its best. So I think that this has had, along with the technological and economic transformation in our organizations, the demographic transformation, that is the participation of women, has had a stronger impact than we are accustomed to acknowledging on how we understand effective leadership. Effective leadership at its core is inclusive. It is always going to be inclusive, good at getting and learning from everybody in the organization. One of the things that concerns me, and I think there are many, many positive effects and outcomes, many positive effects and outcomes of diversity and inclusion initiatives, departments, organizations organizing around creating a space for diversity and inclusion, is that one of the unintended impacts of that has been that inclusion has to some degree become siloed in organizations and put aside as a diversity issue rather than being recognized for what it is a leadership issue and a leadership challenge. An emphasis on inclusion and inclusive practices and inclusive behaviors belongs at the leadership level. And I believe that inclusion at the leadership level is demonstrated in specific behaviors that people throughout the organization recognize as inviting them in. They're behaviors such as we heard talked about this morning. Listening, asking questions, what Hal was talking about. And also I was struck by what Linda Hill had said about abrasive, being able to tolerate a degree of abrasion. That is also an inclusive behavior, being able to show up for that and let things work themselves out and not being frightened of seeing conflicting points of view. That is an inclusive behavior. Now, given that what would be most useful at creating inclusive cultures would be promoting developing and training inclusive leaders, I have a suggestion that may be to some degree counterintuitive. I think it's more important for organizations to focus on hiring for, training for, rewarding and coaching for inclusive behaviors than the way many organizations today seem to go about trying to create leaders who are better at leading a diverse workforce, and that is the hunt for unconscious biases. In my experience, human beings are more likely to shift their attitudes when they practice different behaviors and as a result see different effects, different outcomes because of practicing different behaviors. That's more likely to shift what their attitudes are than starting by trying to uncover attitudes that may not necessarily be helpful and confront individuals with evidence that their assumptions may have underlying biases. It seems to me to be a better approach to come at it the other way and to focus on behaviors, because really the individuals in an organization care more about what a behavior feels like to them and what the message it sends and how much permission or liberty, as Isaac describes it, it sets forth than what a leader's underlying attitude might be. So I believe that cracking the code on the full range of human potential in our increasingly diverse organizations would benefit by more recognition that inclusiveness must start at the top, and it must be demonstrated in behaviors, and that there are ways to hold leadership accountable for those behaviors. Thank you. Oh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally, and I think that's a great statement you made by saying that effective leadership at its core is an inclusive. Sorry, I've got a little. You okay, Claudio?
Sorry, don't worry.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, a little breakage. Now, so we'd like to continue now on, with a slight switch of theme to innovation, and welcome Sunnie Giles. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Over the summer, I took my daughter on a humanitarian expedition to Ghana. And what was really amazing was that when we were there, I saw these termite mounds that are taller than people's height all over the place. And my curiosity got the better of me, and I just wanted to do some research on what termites are and how they live. And what I found was so fascinating. Here is the inside scoop on the termite mound. So first of all, the mound, the termites build a mound in an angle that minimizes the sun exposure. And they make the mounds with materials primarily made of spit and straw, very porous materials that allows ventilation. Also, they build a chimney in the middle of the mound, which allows to expel waste air and also bring in fresh oxygen. They maintain the mound at 86 degrees Fahrenheit constantly throughout the year, which is optimal for the fungal garden, which they use for their food supply. And they have a cellar 6 feet underground. It's a cool chamber, which allows the temperature control in the mound. They also build an opening through which they enter and exit the mound. they draw fresh water, fresh clean water from sources 200 feet underground. If I didn't tell you these were the descriptions of a termite mound, you would have thought these are the descriptions of an ancient civilization. And I started wondering, wow, this is so amazing. How do they do that? Each individual termite intelligence is minuscule, but at the same time, they're exhibiting a behavior that's extraordinarily intelligent as a group. How does that happen? And this is what I found. Number one, all the agents, the individual termites are self-organizing. There is no boss telling them what to do. In fact, the queen termite you think is the leader, but actually that's not the case. Queen termite is just an egg-laying machine. That's all she does. She doesn't actually direct the activities of individual termite. So they're all self-organizing, and because they intuitively know that their well-being is tied to the well-being of the entire colony, the incentives are aligned. And what they do for themselves is also what's best for the termite entire colony. So that is what propels self-organization. Secondly, they use simple rules, such as when the thicker the pheromone, the stronger the pheromone trail, the fastest route to food. Also, when you see danger, alert others by banging your head. These are some of the simple rules they use. 3, they use constant improvement. They make constant improvement through profuse trial and error. And they learn what's best, constantly experiment and find out what the best way to secure food, what the best way to have temperature control. And they also, from profuse trial and error, learned that when they also monitor the density of population in the termite colony, and when it reaches a certain level, group of them actually fly through a mud tube so that it can have protection against temperature as well as predators. So these are some of the things that the termites have found over millions of years of trying different ways of, better ways of surviving. Also, they use general intelligence. So they monitor the density of population for each caste among the termites, and that enables them to figure out, that enables them actually to morph their bodily features to something else, to the dwindling class if a certain class is dwindling. So, and then they use a diversity of input. Each termite has over 1 million termites, and they each learn from each other's wisdom from their previous trial and error. So this is the reason why termites actually is one of the most resilient and successful species in the world. They survived the Great Dying in the Permian period 250 million years ago as a result of this kind of activity. I'm going to tell you a second story, and I want you to see what the parallel is. 2 years ago, in March of 2016, the Google AI AlphaGo had a contest with Lisa Do, who is the reigning world champion of Go in South Korea. And in the contest, Lisa Do lost 1-4, which was a total surprise because AlphaGo is, the Chinese board game of Go is a notoriously very complex game. And they didn't think that would happen until 10 years after, but it happened very quickly. The reason is because it's a very complex game, and the possible board configuration is more than the number of atoms in the universe. So, how did it happen? The agents of AlphaGo are self-organizing. Instead of relying on pre-programmed instructions, they learn they just learned by themselves. There is no master program they're following. Number 2, they use simple rules. AlphaGo has 2 sets of simple rules. One set of rules called policy networks. evaluates the broad board position, and then reduces the search space horizontally. And they also use value networks, which reduces the depth of the search. So these are some of the simple rules that AlphaGo uses. And also, AlphaGo's agents learn from previous trial and error. It played against itself 1 million times and learned from decent amateurs 160,000 times whose games were found on the internet. And AlphaGo used general intelligence. AlphaGo is AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is very robust and resilient instead of a narrow intelligence, which is like Siri or home smart system intelligence. Next is diversity of input. Again, AlphaGo used diversity of input from learning over 160,000 games that they played against from decent amateurs. So this is different than how IBM's Deep Blue won in the game of chess against Garry Kasparov, because they used a brute force approach. This is representative of the business environment in the 19th and 20th century, where our environment is predictable and everybody followed. I'm going to skip all these examples because I'm running out of time. Okay, so time has changed now. So now business environment has changed so much, businesses have to change as well. So in the past, in the industrial era, the end game is known and it's predictable, the environment is predictable. So the game was efficiency. And at the same time, during the time, what was important was controlling the input and optimizing input. So human resource, HR stands for human resource. Even people are viewed as a resource. Legal department over the last couple decades focused on minimizing variances and randomness in the workplace by eliminating any elements of emotion and touch in the workplace. But emotion is what connection is made up of. Without emotion, you can't feel connection. So as a result, we've become the loneliest people in the world, which is ironic in the age of ubiquitous connection. And as a result, there's depression rate is shooting up, suicide rate is shooting up, to the extent that Theresa May, the Prime Minister of the UK, appointed 2 cabinet-level positions, the Minister of Suicide Prevention and Minister of Loneliness. But because the environment has changed so much, the environment is now unpredictable, which means that now we have to unlearn what made us successful in the industrial era and introduce and maximize randomness and variation in the workplace. So I'm going to share with you just briefly the preliminary research results that I found, is that when leaders practice the principles of safety, providing safety for others, and facilitating connection, and as a result, based on the foundation of safety and connection, when their team goes out and safely trying to learn, through previous trial and error, risking failing and being okay with that, knowing that my boss has got my back. When the leaders practice these principles, people are willing to give up 39% of their pay to work for a boss that provides those skills, that has those skills, and which translates into $488 million at the operating expense line in terms of turnover intention, because those people who provide these environment, the turnover intention of the people who work for them is a lot lower, and which translates at the top level and at the top line revenue level over $8 billion for a typical Fortune 500 company. So leadership has a very tangible quantitative impact. Now this is why we need to change the leadership skills and competencies that are desired very quickly. And as a result, if you look at, this is my last slide. If you look at, this is a list of the top 10 companies on S&P 500 list in 2010. This is in 2018. I want you to ask the question, where will you be in 8 years? You need to change as an organization, the leadership competencies that you ask for, demand, and train your leaders on. Otherwise, you will not be on this list, or if you are. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunnie. And last but not least, by any means, Kurt.
Great. Oops. I lost my intro slide. The title of my talk is Liberating the Genius of Teams. And we've heard some wonderful talks about the human characteristics, the fact that innovation, value creation is a human activity, it's a voluntary activity. We've got a whole long list of properties that really do liberate the genius of teams. The question is, how do you do that in a real organization? It's not just the what, it's the how. And I want to share that with you. When I went to SRI, it had been in decline for 20 years and was almost bankrupt. When I left, we'd grown the organization 3.5 times, and we created tens of billions of dollars of new economic value through innovations such as high-definition television, intuitive surgical, and Siri, that's now on the iPhone. It was basically the same people who'd been failing for 20 years who became these people who were so successful. And the world went from one of scarcity to one of abundance with the same people. So today, obviously, we've been talking about innovation, and performance is actually varies between fair or poor. Most tech transfer programs lose money. Most incubators lose money. Most venture capitalists, even in Silicon Valley, lose money. What's going on? Well, I'm going to argue that essential skills and capabilities are missing, some of the things we've talked about. Now, everybody in this room knows that most of the big opportunities today are multidisciplinary, which requires we have teams. That requires creativity, collaboration, motivation, behaviors, skills, incentives, all the things we've been talking about. And the tricky part is, how do you put that combination of things together so the results you want are almost inevitable? So you can look at your organization and know it's on the path of doing what you need. There are a lot of ineffective methods. Admonishing people is a really effective way to get them angry at you and leave your company. That doesn't work. Individual feedback is good, but it doesn't scale very well. The amount of improvement you get from doing individual training of people really is completely insufficient. Brainstorming is okay, but value creation is an extended event, so that doesn't really solve the problem. And incubation methods without shared mental frameworks to think about the problems that have to be solved don't work either. And most importantly, all the things we've been talking about are only learned one way. You cannot read a book and know how to be a leader, or any of the things we're talking about. They all have to be learned experientially, and that includes value creation. Now, we did a 2-year study with the National Academy of Engineering looking at these issues, and sure enough, we documented relatively poor performance, and particularly poor collaboration, because people don't share mental frameworks about what to do. And if people, it's kind of a Tower of Babel, you shouldn't be surprised if collaboration is difficult. The report recommended that we create a value creation playbook so we could communicate to our staff. And it includes things like working on important problems. What does that mean? Most people work on interesting problems, not important ones. Simple frameworks, I mentioned mental frameworks. To me, the most important one is the value proposition. What's the important need, and what's your approach for the offering and the business model? What are the benefits per cost? That's the value of the idea. And how does that all compare to the competition? Just 4 questions. And what we've learned is if you can't answer those 4 questions, you still don't know what you're really doing. And they're hard to answer. They're really hard to answer. And they iterate with each other. So if you change one of them, it changes the other one. That's part of the complexity of being a value creator. Complicated systems just don't work with real people. Thank you. You need a way to learn fast, which is what I'm going to tell you about today. You need what we call value creation forums. And we believe a paradigm shift, like we saw at SRI and other organizations we worked with, is possible. As part of our work, we created the playbook for the National Science Foundation, the biggest funding agency in the United States. So let me tell you how we did this. When new people, all the new people came to SRI, I personally gave a workshop to them on our vision and strategy, on the importance of innovation and value creation in our playbook, and then our values: respect, integrity, trust, non-negotiable. And then we ran meetings like this, which I'll tell you about. We held meetings that were recurring meetings where people would have to stand up and present their basic NABC value proposition. There'd be 4 to 6 teams in the room, and you'd only have 2 to 5 minutes to present. Presenters would then listen, no arguing. We've heard several talks about the importance of that. And then you'd get questions and answers from the audience around the room. So what worked, what didn't work, eyes of the customer, eyes of the investor, suggestions for alternatives, that sort of thing. Very quick, very fast. And the reason it works is when you give your presentation and you get the feedback, it only provides incremental improvement for you. It's like imagine if you had to get your glasses by taking complete glasses off and putting them on one at a time. It would work, it's just slow and inefficient. But this process, as soon as you sat down, you listened to the next one, and because you had this shared framework for what the answers the questions that have to be answered, you could then compare it. Compare yours to them. And then the third person, you'd compare and compare and compare. And that comparison is how you learn fast. You see somebody answered finally, what does it mean to me to address a need? What does it mean to address the competition? What does a really good business model look like? It's an experiential way to learn, and to learn really fast. So the other thing is, how do you get these teams and put them together and cooperate in these kind of environments? As Alan Kay said, point of view is worth an extra IQ points. And that's what you're trying to do with the Genius Level 2. You're trying to put together a mix of skills, the kind of diversity where different people can solve different pieces of the problem. To do that, one of the secrets is to focus on important things, not interesting things. Interesting things, it's hard for people to collaborate because, frankly, there's very little that comes from that. But for important things like forming Siri, we were able to form, I think, the best team in the world. We got everybody we wanted to come and work on that because it was a big, important problem. And those people have to share the vision. They have to have unique complementary roles. And obviously, they have to share in the rewards. And if you violate this, they won't cooperate the way you want. We've talked a lot about human values. Respect, integrity, those things matter even more in this world. Are you going to work 60, 70, or 80 hours a week with someone who doesn't treat you with respect? Won't happen. And what about motivation? Well, everybody talks about money and other things, but the truth is the best people are motivated first and foremost by achievement. Achievement. Everything I've done has taken 10 years to do. And if I wasn't passionately committed to it, I never would have forced through to see that vision come true. And that's generally true of all major innovations. So what we did at SRI, I told you I gave a workshop to everybody. Then we gave a 2-day workshop to our professional staff to learn the fundamentals of innovation, and then we work on their projects. And then we had these value creation forums going every 2 to 6 weeks where people would stand up, give their value proposition, and do this kind of recursive, exponential compounding learning. So in summary, we all have a customer. At SRI, when I was CEO, Everybody knew they had a customer. Everybody knew what an NABC value proposition was. Because if you have a customer, your job is to continuously deliver more value to them. Imagine an enterprise where everybody knows that every discussion starts with a customer need. That is transformative just by itself. But you can only learn these skills by doing. I mentioned 3 important concepts today that go into that. And it's the combination of the forms and the NABC value propositions that make the comparative learning work and provides for a learning teaching environment. And because it's a friendly, supportive environment, it also provides the motivation, the creativity, the collaboration, the incentives, all the other ingredients you need to really drive high-performance teams. And as I said, just by making these few changes, we went from an organization that had been failing for 20 years to one that consistently now changes the world for the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And now please do keep your questions coming. Quite a few coming through on the Slido. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion, and I'll start off and bring in any questions we get time for as well. I'd actually like to start with the end. So Kurt, just a question for you. You're a serial innovator. You've achieved so much. But the question I think I'd like to ask is, as CEO, can you give us an example of where you feel you've really unlocked potential in somebody?
Well, I'll tell you a funny thing. All the things we've done, my teams have won 2 Emmys and all kinds of stuff. And I'll tell you, the thing I'm most proud of is what we did for our people. We gave them skills to thrive in this world. And there's an example. I once went into a meeting and there was a new graduate, a PhD woman, a physicist from India. And she was talking to a Japanese client. And clearly, there was no information going back and forth between her and the customer. And part of the problem was not just the language difficulty, but she wasn't representing the value that she had created. So I went to her after the meeting, because I was always walking around, by the way, and trying to find these people who I thought had potential. And I said, why don't you go to one of our value creation forums and work on your innovation and learn all the stuff we can teach you about how to be a successful innovator. So she said yes. I didn't hear from her again for 9 months. And then one day she called me up and she said, Kurt, would you come to a party tonight? We're going to celebrate. Well, one little bit here. I didn't know when I saw her 9 months earlier that she was a little worried about her career because she was having no success. Anyway, I go to the party, and she wants to thank everybody. She just won a $5 million research program, and she completed the business transaction with the Japanese client. And 9 months with that sort of thing is record speed. Trust me, record speed. So she said to me, Kurt, when you saw me that day, you said that I thought that I had a big idea, but I had not given you a gift to take to your wife. So I said, yes, I can kind of remember that. She said, I now want to give you that gift. So I'll use my napkin here. She held up a plastic bag, and she said, our customer needs to remove CO2 from a chemical process. It's not environmental, it's a chemical process. And this is the competing technology. It's removed the CO2, and what we saw was a brown layer on the bottom and a bright yellow layer on the top. This is competition. So, and she held up another bag, and she said, this bag contains CO2. And we used our technology to remove it. And what you see is, it looks like pure water on the bottom of it. So she said, by the way, the competing technology is not biodegradable, so it has to go through another step. Our technology is not only biodegradable, it can be sold in the secondary market as fertilizer. And the result is our technology is not only green, it's also half the cost of the competition. And then she said the most important thing. She said, when I took this to my customer, they immediately took it to the CTO of the company, who immediately took it to the CEO of the company, and that's why we won this program so quickly. And then she handed me these bags and said, Kurt, here's the gift for your wife. And I took it home and I gave it to my wife. I could not be more proud of that young woman. And she's had enormous success ever since because she learned the capabilities to be a successful value creator. What would happen if every organization was doing that for their staff?
Thank you. Very powerful. So, changing topics slightly here. The gender gap, Sally, this is probably one for you. It's predicted to take another 100 years until we get sort of...
Can't hear you.
You hear?
I'm just having trouble hearing you.
Okay. So the gender gap is taking another 100 years to close, is predicted by the World Economic Forum. What can be done to accelerate this?
All right. I don't buy the prediction of the 100 years at the rate. In my experience, this, it also depends on what we're talking about. Are we evaluating gender gap based on the CEOs of the 500 largest companies in the world? Then it will take a long time. But if we're looking at more what is the strategic level of the contribution women are making in influential organizations, I think that is obviously proceeding apace. So we wanted to some degree, but to some degree, decouple this from pure positional power. I think that distorts the impact that women have had and are continuing to have. As I tried to articulate, to some extent, women have had an impact, a significant impact on how we define leadership and what we see as what is excellence in leadership. Also, in my experience of being in this for a long time, is this moves at a discontinuous rate. And I do believe that we're in a time where there's a rapid acceleration right now in the capacity of women to move into positions of greater influence, but also just have that bigger influence. And I think it's really partly because women have much more confidence in the power of what they have to say and contribute. And they're becoming better able to articulate that and clearer about any kind of self-imposed barriers that have gotten in their way and more determined to address that. So I do think that predictions of this taking 100 years are kind of in the category of predictions of in 100 years we'll all have a second home on Mars. Well, yeah, maybe, but it doesn't really resonate with what my experience is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Claudio, yes,
Can I
please
build on
do.
that briefly? Thanks, Sally. I am also extremely optimistic. Yeah. I really believe that if we fight those three things about ignorance, apathy, and perverse incentives, we will capture the female advantage. Let me illustrate. Ignorance. We've done research in our database out of hundreds of thousands of senior leaders assessed, and women, on average, are slightly less competent than men, but have higher potential. In the 4 hallmarks of potential, they score higher in 3 of them. How can they have higher potential and lower competence? Because they were not given the chance. But if we educate people on this will happen. Perverse incentives. Headhunters usually charge a contingency percentage fee, which means I will cash in if you hire the person that I present, on the one hand, and on the other hand, they cash in a percentage of the compensation. And because men are paid higher than women, men tend to be favored more than headhunters who use a percentage fee. So you should work with a fixed fee. And finally, caring, fighting apathy. McKinsey has shown that the #1 condition to promote gender diversity is to have a CEO that really cares. So I am convinced that by becoming more knowledgeable about it, the gender gap will be closed much faster. And it's the greatest talent opportunity we have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. Now, a question from the audience. I think this might be for you, Isaac, actually. If CEOs need to let go of ego and empower employees, why should they be paid often 100 times more than their staff?
I expected a little bit this question. In this over 100 companies that I observed, but there are several hundred companies in the world today that operate in that fashion. Each one of them did it in its own way, but they all began with one common step that I emphasized. The CEO let go of her or his ego. And the reason for that is, in fact, to create this space where the leaders will emerge, the people will emerge, their potential will be unleashed. And once that happens, my friend Vinit said that the magic will happen. In fact, this magic is that they need less and less supervision, less and less of people to be there. So you need to get out of their way. Now, why CEOs are still paid a lot? In these companies, they are still paid. Maybe not the same difference than in traditional companies, because this whole transformation was guided, initiated by these liberating leaders. They didn't do it by themselves. It has been co-created with people, because every company is unique. There's no model, there's no method, but they initiated it. They only them have the power to launch the transformation. They initiated it, and they created this environment where people got involved in co-creating a new version of their company. That worth a lot. And then they can go fishing, some go hunting at work time, not retired, and the things go even better when they are there. That's the measure. That's why I said the true measure of leadership is redundancy. How do you create an organization that works better when you are not there, so you can take care about thinking what is our vision, purpose today? Maybe the one that we had developed 1 year or 3 years ago is not relevant anymore. So you need it for something else than being there and running this stuff.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, we are out of time now, which is such a pity. We could go on for a lot longer, I know, but I'm afraid we have to close there. So just say a huge round of applause for our speakers and a wonderful audience. Thank you. Thank you.